Do you want to introduce yourself first?
Do I?
Do you think people will care? I think just a little bit of relevant background, okay?
Do you think people will care? All right. I'm Blake Householder. I'm a software engineer. I worked with my friend Craig here at NASA. We both worked for different subcontractors at one point, and we're high school friends.
Okay. Well, I'm Craig Mitchell, and I work at a company as an engineer.
You gotta come up with a good joke name for your company.
Yeah, okay, I will. I'll think about that. Yeah, when I worked at NASA, I was a simulation analyst for the robotic arm. So, shuttle program from 2006 to 2010. And then I left NASA, and Blake had left NASA, and now we're going to spend about an hour talking about NASA. Hopefully, we can stretch that long.
It doesn't always have to be NASA.
Yeah, the original intention was to just talk about the space shuttle and the shuttle program, but I have some things I'd like to say about NASA too that I think we can converse about in an interesting way.
You have a few things to say about NASA, huh?
I have some things to say about that.
I don't think anyone's gonna care who we are.
Okay, so you think the shuttle was a failure. How do you feel about the shuttle?
I suppose it was not a failure in every sense of the word. It made for some really cool posters. There were some kids who got to fly their classroom experiments. Like what happens to some kids' clay sculpture in space. And a bunch of astronauts got to float around. That's really cool, right? That's worth a couple $1 billion. Um, Presumably they flew a couple of classified payloads up. Yay. No other way to do that besides a space shuttle, right? And it cost the taxpayers billions. I guess they got a bunch of really great science out of it, such as.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point. I was reading Richard Feynman one time, and he made exactly that point. He was talking about when he was on the Challenger Accident Investigation Committee, and he said that before he was asked to join that, he just kind of, he knew the space shuttle thing was going on, and he was not really that interested. But something he had noticed before he was asked to be on the committee, and when he was pretty apathetic about the space program, was that he would never see any scientific journal articles that came out of space shuttle stuff. Like, there was nothing being done on the space shuttle that made it into journal articles.
Yeah, that's pretty damning. I mean, I talk about it with other people and they always say, I don't know, Velcro? And then I point out, didn't we invent Velcro on the ground and then fly it in missions? Also, that predates the shuttle by decades. What else happened?
Okay, so my argument is that the spacecraft was pretty good.
At what?
It was a pretty nice spacecraft. Okay, so it could perform a wide range of missions, right? You could take humans to space and you could bring them back, which is useful. You could take payloads to space, you could retrieve payloads, and you could bring them back. It had an airlock, so you could have some people spacewalking and others not. So, like the Apollo command module had no airlock. So, when the two guys the lunar excursion module, when it got to the moon's surface, there's no airlock. And so, both guys have to suit up and then open the door, which was part of the mission plan, but you had no flexibility to leave one guy inside unsuited. And so, the space shuttle with an airlock gives you that flexibility.
In the LIMS defense, they were on the moon. They weren't in low Earth orbit.
Are you saying there would be a lot of incentive for everybody to go moonwalking?
We just can't keep the astronauts off the moon.
I don't understand that argument. They're like, we're here, we might as well all moonwalk.
No, that
Why
defeats
would
your
we even
argument.
have an
If they're all
airlock?
moonwalking, then you still don't need an airlock. It's got to just be a revolving door going in and coming out.
Right, but when you have an airlock, you can decide to have some people not have spacesuits and not do EVAs.
Why are you flying 7 people up?
On the space shuttle?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was always a little skeptical of that too, because I only know of one case where they did a spacewalk with 3 people. There was a satellite retrieval mission, and basically part of the command system of the satellite had malfunctioned, and they really couldn't get the satellite to stop spinning totally. So they spent like 2 hours trying to get the shuttle to match the rotation rates, except you're doing it in orbit. And so as you process around through the orbit, you have orbital mechanical effects that also harm your ability to exactly match. Like you have to do it kind of quickly and get the arm out there and grab it. And so finally they were able to capture it, and they start pushing it down into the little locks in the payload bay so they can latch it down. And they couldn't get it. There wasn't enough torque with the arm. So they were having all these problems. And so what they did is they just sent a third guy out, which is kind of weird because they had 3 spacesuits, I guess. And they had 3 guys who were able to do EVA. And so that's the only case I know of where they sent 3 people on an EVA, because they had to physically get 3 guys out there to push down on the satellite to latch it in place.
With their lassos.
So as far as I know, they only ever did EVA with 2 people. And I think the argument would be, and I know this from like the Hubble servicing mission I worked on, you would have the pilot/commander, and you'd have a co-pilot. And then you would have 2 groups of 2 EVA guys, and they would alternate days that they did EVAs. And then you would just have a 7th person because there were 7 usable seats.
Yeah.
So I'm not entirely sure that like 7 is really an optimal number that they came to for any particular reason. It was just like, we can fly this many, and a human only weighs another like 150 pounds.
I feel like you're doing astronaut number 7 a disservice by not using their real title, which is mission specialist.
I think they were, if you weren't a pilot or a co-pilot, you were a mission specialist.
Mm-hmm. And when they flew, who was it? I can't remember. It was that, I believe, Iranian woman who paid a lot to be on the shuttle. They did not call her cargo, which would have been her actual title.
They did that informally with, is his name Bill Nelson? He's the senator from Florida. Like, he used his role as a senator to get himself on a shuttle flight in the 90s, and his call sign was Ballast.
Ballast is good too. He's not even cargo. They're like, if we gotta shed weight, he's gonna be the first one out of here.
He's not even as useful as cargo. He's just ballast. Yeah. So I don't know that 7 people served any particular use. But what is your problem with 7? Are you like, why do we need a vehicle so complex as to carry 7 people?
Well,
are you saying we should have had a simpler vehicle that only carried like 3, and maybe 3 would have been useful enough?
Well, I feel like you're asking kind of a complicated question there. I mean, I feel like we shouldn't have had the vehicle at all. We should have said, here's the goal we're trying to achieve, and we should have built a purpose-specific vehicle for that. And maybe there would have been 2 different kinds of vehicles. Probably not 3. I doubt there would ever be 3. But there would probably be some kind of heavy lift thing where you could attach a manned unit to it. And then there'd probably be some much lighter lift thing where you could put a satellite on it. And you did see that happening all around the shuttle program with different types of defense and reconnaissance launches and commercial satellites. People were using all kinds of other rockets that were more mission specific, and they would achieve their goal, and they didn't have to fly 7 meat bags up into orbit and back. And no one even knows what the 7th one was for. And so at the point the shuttle was designed, they were designing it saying, we're going to carry around all these extra people. For what? What could they have accomplished?
You know, I think that it could hold up to 10. I seem to remember that. I brought up several Wikipedia pages preparing for this, but that's not one of the stats on the right side up at the top. I agree. And you know, it's kind of like the F-35 or something, where it's just like, let's build one thing to do all of this, instead of let's do it right and have a couple of purpose-built things. I agree with that.
What did you say it was like?
The F-35.
Oh, yeah. Boy, the F-35. That's like a different podcast episode.
I think so. You better add that to the list.
All right.
And and what you say about, they should have had a heavy lift thing that you could bring like large cargoes or people on, and then a lighter lift thing for satellites and small cargoes. Yeah. And I think that kind of strikes to the problem NASA has today, which is it's still trying to screw around with getting people in the orbit. And I don't think NASA should mess with that. I think that you should just leave that up to SpaceX and some other companies that will come along and be able to do it privately. I think what NASA should be doing is leveraging the fact that we have a space station in orbit, and NASA should be designing a vehicle that can go from the space station to other places. And just let other companies deal with getting people to the space station. And then you have this other vehicle that lives at the space station. Maybe it needs to be assembled there over several flights. And then you bring people up on commercial launches. You get them on that little spaceship, and then you can go to the moon, or you can go to Mars, or you can go to like an L5 or whatever Lagrange points are interesting and do stupid stuff, or, like capture a asteroid for some stupid reason.
In case there's some asteroids hanging out at L5.
Yeah, but at least that gives you a lot of flexibility, and I feel like that's something that the commercial industry is not ready to do, right? Commercial is still trying to put people in the orbit in efficient ways, and maybe NASA could build a spaceship. A real spaceship.
Is commercial really trying to put people into space?
Maybe for no other reason than to sell that service to NASA. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I'm going to make the controversial argument that putting people into space is mostly pretty useless.
Yeah. You made an argument to me many years ago, probably when we were both working at NASA and we were highly demoralized. And you said that going to the moon is so worthless that even if you could land there and take a shovel outside and scoop up shovelfuls of Pentium processors and take them home, it would still not be worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
And you were just trying to come up with, what's basically the most valuable thing we can produce per mass. And if we could just go there and pick them up off the ground by the shovelful, could we make it worthwhile to go to the moon? And your opinion was no.
Pentium processor soil. I should do the math on that now. I should find out how valuable is a core and how much does it cost. And then we could figure out how much this stupid couple moon rocks cost and work it out. Leave one of your ballast guys on the surface and you take a few more cores with you.
Several 100 pounds more. Throw out
Kilograms.
Most of the food. It's only a couple days back to Earth. You don't need to eat.
Do they really need to eat? It's only a 3-day mission. We're picking up Pentium cores here.
You need some energy bars, otherwise they get low blood sugar and they get cranky.
just coffee.
Some gummy bears.
Yeah, that actually comes from an argument I was making to a friend's dad who also worked at NASA. He was on the train of, we go to the moon and we do these other things because they're hard and because they're awesome. And I've read a lot of sci-fi books, and so of course we should go. But someone has to pay for it. And so if you think, why would I pay for it? Then it being awesome is not as important to everybody. And if you're funding it with taxpayer money, then it, in theory, should be valuable to the taxpayers. And so my argument was, at that time, I was in a period of value drift where I was gradually coming to realize that perhaps it was not worth what was being paid for it. And I think that's probably true. I think it isn't worth what we pay for it. However, if anybody is going to jump on the internet and criticize me right now, know that I think all the unmanned stuff, that's pretty cool. And it delivers a pretty good dollar value. And it's probably still a waste of money, but that's more along the lines of, well, fireworks are a waste of money, but we keep buying them. Like, fireworks are awesome. Nobody debates that. You've probably bought fireworks yourself. I bought fireworks. They're awesome. And so flying right by Pluto and taking a shot at it, or the Voyager satellites, those things are great. And I would gladly pay my share of taxes that went to fund those.
Okay, I think we strayed pretty far away from the Space Shuttle itself.
I blame you.
That's fine. So, Yeah, I think it had a lot of useful things it could do. I think the big problem was that it was designed for a specific mission, which was the wrong mission, right? And so I was doing some research on this, and basically they did this council in 1969, and they said, what are our four options for, post Apollo stuff? And they said, we can do a human mission to Mars, we can do more lunar stuff, we can do low Earth orbit infrastructure, or we can do nothing. Just discontinue manned spaceflight. Right, I guess that's kind of a control group or something. So, it basically, the council with President Nixon said, let's do low Earth orbit infrastructure. And so I think that was the problem, more than the space shuttle itself. I think for that mission, the space shuttle was pretty okay. It wasn't great at anything, but it tried to take a lot of people. It tried to have an unpowered gliding reentry.
Is that valuable?
At the time they thought it was. I think it was still valuable in retrospect, but not as valuable as they thought it would be at the start. Because they could never turn the shuttle around in the time and for the costs that they originally thought. Right? They originally thought they were going to fly the shuttle 55 times a year.
Did they think that?
Yes. Or were they just lying and trying to sell it that way?
That was my impression.
Okay.
I mean, I don't want to call out any specific guy and say this guy was lying about it, but I think they had this spreadsheet or the equivalent thereof. I guess maybe it was pre-spreadsheet. And they just said, if we keep pushing this number of missions per year number up, the costs keep going down and requesting the budget gets really, really easy. This is a whole other argument I have about NASA, that NASA does this really good job. There's probably even a word for it, of planning a mission and not including the total cost of ownership, if you will, in the initial budgetary request. The example I like to point out to people is when the Voyagers and other deep space probes have gone on their missions, they have an RTG. So for people who don't know what that means, it's a radiothermal isotope generator. It has decaying plutonium inside of it and a bunch of thermocouples, which can generate electricity directly from a heat differential. And so the plutonium decays, it produces some amount of heat, even in deep space. The thermocouples produce electricity. Gradually, the plutonium decays. Also, gradually, the plutonium destroys the thermocouples. This all occurs at a very, very known rate, and it's occurring over a very long period of time, like maybe 20, 30 years or something for the lifetime of the Voyagers. And so NASA will request some budget, maybe 8 years or something, for monitoring these probes. Send them off into space. And then after 8 years, you read some article in the press that's like, oh my gosh, there's still a little bit of life left in these probes. We're still getting useful data. And everyone's like, wow, it lasted way past its design lifetime. No, it didn't. Everybody knew exactly how much electricity the RTG was going to be producing 30 years in. They know how much electricity it's going to be producing in 100 years. And every single system uses some specified number of watts that was determined with great care. And so they know exactly how long every single bit of it is going to last. And they know when they're going to have to start shutting down components. And you always read about this in the news. Surprise, it lasted past its design lifetime. Except, no, it didn't. That sort of assumes that NASA is smart enough to get this stuff into space and doing its job, but then dumb enough to not know how long it's going to last.
And so then they don't budget the costs of 30 years of monitoring. They only budget 8.
Yeah, it's like a coupon.
And so I think the word you're going for there is externalizing the cost, almost.
Yeah, kinda.
Or they're trying to defer it and just pretend like this cost isn't going to be there. And then 8 years down the road, they kind of play stupid and they're like, the RTG still works. If you fund us for another 10 years, we can keep monitoring it.
It's a science miracle.
It's got 22 years left. That's what you're saying. They play silly with those numbers.
Yeah, and so for the shuttle, if the shuttle got more and more reusable, the cost per launch went down. And if you're a competing contractor saying, hey, why don't we use single-use rockets, then your rocket that gets destroyed by the mission starts not looking cost-effective against the shuttle.
Yeah. It comes to another problem in government contracting, which is you just need to get your foot in the door. And then it's dump trucks of money forever.
Dump trucks and dump trucks.
One after another.
Cargo containers.
But seriously, you look at stuff like the F-35 program again, it's like a decade behind schedule and, way, way, way over budget. And eventually they'll maybe reel the costs in and everything. But all you have to do is make some numbers, have rationale for them in your estimate, win the contract. And then reality will set in eventually, but it's not like somebody in 1987 could have said, hey, we lost a shuttle and it's super expensive. We're never going to be able to fly 55 missions a year. Let's throw the whole damn thing out and just start over with that other guy's idea.
87? That's pretty late, right?
Wasn't Challenger in 86? It crashed? Yeah.
Yeah, I think
so. And so,
crashed.
Yeah, right. Wrong verb, but...
It bumped into a leaky O-ring, I guess.
They come out of nowhere. No one could have predicted it.
Oh yeah, definitely. We'll put that down for another podcast sometime.
I think everybody should just read Richard Feynman's Appendix K to the Challenger Accident Investigation Report.
Yes, I would recommend that. I'd recommend that to anyone who's interested in any kind of engineering at all.
Yeah. So I believe it's Appendix K. It may be a different letter, but Google will tell you. So just read that.
Yeah. So originally we were talking about the low orbit infrastructure. I think one of the other motivating factors for that had to have been the Cold War. Because you imagine all these missiles and lasers and bombs, and they all have the American flag on them, and eagles and stuff. And they'll strike fear in the hearts of the communists. And I think the idea of shuttling military hardware to low Earth orbit, which really was just the high ground, sounded really appealing.
Yeah, I read something at some point, and I can't remember if it was a plan that was studied by the U.S. or if it was something that came out, after the USSR dissolved and a lot of records started coming out. It was something they were worried about. But at some point, a bunch of people were thinking about using the space shuttle to go into orbit and steal Russian satellites.
Do we know that never happened?
So that's interesting. There were a couple of black missions, of course. Yeah, I don't really know anything about those. There are some things that some other coworkers while I was there speculated about. They weren't involved in the black missions. They speculated that there were different robotic arm type things used because the space shuttle has this articulated robotic arm for moving around payload, and it's mounted on the
what's it called?
It's called the SRMS, the Shuttle Remote Manipulator System. It has no other name. No other cutesy, stupid name.
Are you sure it has no other name?
Yes, I'm totally sure. Despite what the public relations people at NASA may once in a while say, everyone who works on the arm calls it the SRMS and nothing else. It sits on the right side of the payload bay, but on the aft cockpit where you control it from, looking out into the payload bay, looking aft in the vehicle, the arm is on the right side. But on the control panel that you control it from at the aft cockpit, there's a giant switch at the top in the center that is to switch to left or right manipulator. And so it was designed to have two manipulators. You could install one on the left side also. It didn't need to be like a mirror image manipulator. It was all the joints had full range. So, you could take two identical manipulators, install them on the left and the right, and you could have two arms that would run. And they never used that, but they always had that capability to plug in a second arm on the left side. And that's what a coworker of mine who was not involved with the black missions speculated. And, it was the kind of thing where he had heard people over the years and they had heard people. And that was the big speculation was that they had hooked something else up on the left side there. Almost certainly a laser cannon because Russia and the high ground. But,
it's a
they had
railgun.
hooked something. They had, but we're talking 1980s, so it would have been a laser cannon.
They had railguns.
So they hooked something else up there, and did they ever steal a satellite? Who cares? That's a dumb question. They were both launching tons of satellites, even if they could have stolen one.
If you go through the mental exercise of what value would you get out of stealing this satellite, it's really hard to come up with something that you couldn't get another way.
Yeah, just normal espionage would have been a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. They probably had a pretty good idea of everything that was in the satellites.
Yeah. And I doubt the Russians ever had, any advanced communication technology that we lacked.
What about the thing.
Oh, what's the thing?
Oh, it's a sophisticated listening device. It was just an antenna, and it needed to be irradiated by a certain frequency of radio waves, and then it would replay, or it would modulate the radio signal by the audio that was in the room.
Yes.
There's a whole Wikipedia article about it. I recommend anyone interested in espionage stuff go read about it. It's pretty cool because it didn't have a power supply, so that was pretty neat. I think that anything cool that was in those satellites definitely would have been gettable through espionage.
Okay, so the space shuttle probably didn't steal any satellites. Or fire a laser cannon.
We're going to cross that one off the list. Did it never fire a laser cannon? Hey, they had laptops with CD drives, right? Those have little laser cannons.
Little tiny ones.
There you go.
So that's one...
So
that's an obnoxious thing that the astronauts would complain about, like in the later years of the space shuttle program, is they could never do anything with the software on the shuttle. And so they just started scabbing laptops onto the shuttle to hold everything.
What's that word you use? Scabbing?
Scab.
Oh.
In verb form.
What does that mean exactly?
It means that you just put something new on top, like a scab forms over a wound.
Oh, okay.
You just add it on kind of haphazardly and in kind of a technically gross way. Like we do that on aircraft too. Like we add iPads to aircraft a lot nowadays.
I'm pretty sure that EULA that you have to click through before you add it to your fighter jet says that you can't use it for any mission critical hardware.
I'm pretty sure Apple puts stuff in that EULA that's like, you won't use this to blow up people in third world nations.
What happens if you're the US government and you violate it?
Oh, man. Okay, space shuttle stuff. Okay, so I was going to defend this as, you know, the vehicle was pretty good, but it's just the program and the mission was poorly selected.
So you mean the vehicle was good in that it did the things it was designed to do?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, okay. I guess I feel like it's a very weak argument.
So we built most of the space station on the back of the shuttle, right?
Yeah.
So most of the stuff we launched up to the space station, most of the mass was taken up on the shuttle.
Yeah.
So it was really good for that. So you could have a vehicle that could go up there, take a large module, and then connect with the station, and then use the manipulator arm to attach that module. Now, later on, they used...
Even going by that, isn't it a really inefficient way to accomplish exactly that task?
Well, would you build a heavy lift vehicle that could take like one module up and then
Yes.
throw away the rest of the vehicle every time?
I haven't done the spreadsheet analysis on this, but it actually seems like that would be more cost effective.
What I recall was that the marginal cost of one additional shuttle mission was about $400 million.
Okay, that might be hard to beat.
Because I remember there was a point when I was working there in, like, I don't know, 2008 or 2009 or something. And they were actually trying to decide, like, what to do with the last mission's worth of hardware on the manifest. Because after Columbia was lost, they bought all the hardware they would need to finish the shuttle manifest. Right. And so...
What's the shuttle manifest?
So the shuttle manifest was all of the proposed missions to that point. And they kind of, you know, decided which ones were super critical, like finishing the space station was decided to be absolutely critical. You couldn't retire the shuttle until you finished that. Otherwise, it wasn't getting done. And then also you needed to service the Hubble again. And so that was the manifest.
That was STS-400, right?
Yes. No, 400 was the proposed rescue mission.
Oh, right. Okay.
It was STS-125, I believe, was the actual servicing mission. But don't quote me on that. So...
You're getting quoted.
Great. So about 2003, they said, here are all the missions we absolutely have to do to finish the station, service the Hubble one more time. And so that's the manifest. And at that point, what they did is they went to all of their suppliers and they said, here's how many missions worth of parts we need you to go ahead and supply us. We'll purchase them. And then, you know, you're relieved. That's all we're going to do. And so, you know, you get into like the 2006, 2007 timeframe. And all these parts have been delivered. And so I actually went to a talk once while I was there, and Wayne Hale, who was the chief of the director of the Space Shuttle program for several years, and an all around like big shot at NASA who held a bunch of important jobs. He was giving this keynote speech at this discussion, and he was talking about this very thing, and he said, "Look, all of these mom and pop shops that are like in every congressperson's district that make parts for the shuttle, like they literally have shut down. They are out of business. Like some of them retired because this is all they did. Some of them went out of business because they didn't have, enough other work to support themselves. Some of them just simply moved on to other type of aerospace work. You can't get these parts anymore." And his quote, which I love quoting to people, from Wayne Hale, because everyone around NASA loves Wayne Hale, and he's a really interesting guy. But he's standing up there in front of this conference room of just all these NASA engineers, and he goes, "The idea that we are flying any extra missions is bullshit." And because there would always be this talk in the press, about, oh, well, we could add missions, will Congress approve money for more missions? And it was like, well, I guess they could, but, it's going to cost like a lot more money. It's going to cost an order of magnitude more money per mission, because you're going to have to recertify these suppliers and all these other things you'd have to do. So the manifest was set. And so you ended up at this point in the late 2000s where they had these extra parts, and they said, look, we have enough. We can do a mission, because essentially it's like one more round of spares for everything. And so they said, we can do one more mission. We need to decide what to do. And that's where that number of $400 million marginal cost for one additional mission came from, or my recollection of it. Because we were in all these meetings, and they were talking about that, and they were talking about, what exactly should we do on this mission that we would like to get up there. And there was a lot of horse trading for, what payloads and what mass would be taken up, because it was the last chance to send it up on a shuttle. Mm. So if you want to build the space station...
What ended up winning?
What won? The urine thing?
What? Was it an enormous urine experiment?
Yeah. No, what won?
Yeah, what mission and payload won?
Oh, you're asking me? I thought you were going to make a joke here. You set that up like a joke. No, I don't recall. I don't really care either. Oh, okay. But if you say we should have built the space station by like using a heavy lift vehicle to launch each module, or maybe two modules or whatever, then in retrospect you have to beat that cost, right? About $400 million.
So that was someone dividing the cost of the shuttle program over its life by the missions?
Okay, so that gets into that's a very interesting question that you could almost do an entire podcast on.
That's your marginal cost figure right there.
The marginal cost is you have everything running. How much does it cost to add one additional mission? Right?
Yeah, but that's going to exist in this framework of, we're not flying arbitrary rockets, we're flying the same rocket over and over and over. And so it's going to have a program associated with it.
Yeah.
And so you're not going to get away from these costs.
Okay. I know. And in the aircraft industry, this is always something that people like to lie with a lot. Do we include all the R&D costs? Do we include ongoing maintenance costs of the vehicles? What's the flyaway cost? I saw a really good explanation of it once, and it had like 6 different definitions of costs for aircraft based on what exactly you're tallying. And they're all relevant in certain discussions. And you can very easily use them to lie about what something costs.
Yeah, I guess you would care about the pension of the retired aircraft pilot after they retire from the military.
Right. Out of all of his flight hours, what proportion of his flight hours were on that airframe? And that proportion of his pension.
Yeah, and you do care, because if you don't pay him that money, then maybe that thing isn't going to fly.
Yeah.
Or it's not going to fly with the same level of expertise you would hope for.
Okay, so I believe I recall that a Falcon 9 launch cost about $87 million, right?
All right. Let's make some typing noises here. Falcon 9 launch cost $62 million.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And they're landing the first stage to reuse.
It's pretty good value. However, in the shuttle's defense, I can't believe I'm defending the shuttle, but the Falcon 9 gets to take advantage of, what is it, 40 years of progress in computers.
Yes.
And I think that makes all the difference in the world. Well, let's not discount also material science. That's another big one.
Yeah.
Also, it got to learn any of the lessons from the shuttle program and any other rockets that have gone since.
Yeah.
So you could not have built the Falcon 9 and launched it in 1980. You would have had to build something else.
Yeah. Yeah, the shuttle had a 40-year disadvantage to it.
You think Elon Musk is great? Go back in time 40 years and then try and accomplish the same stuff.
I don't think he's
I know
great.
You don't think he's great.
But that's the subject of another podcast. That's going to be a great one.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear about that.
We'll have to break out Tesla from Elon Musk. I think Elon Musk should be his own discussion.
Yeah, I agree. I was just reading things in the news today about him calling for regulation in AI. And oh boy, I can disagree with that for a really long time. Ugh, that's just infuriating. But anyway. So you think the space shuttle was good at doing exactly what it was designed to do for exactly the cost that it cost?
I think you should be more condescending. You should frame this as, you think the space shuttle was good at doing exactly what it ended up doing.
It does kind of sound like that. It sounds like you took a couple shots at the barn and you drew a circle around them and you said, there, look, I hit the target.
I've never heard that expression. I'm going to have to use that. But I think it was very ambitious. I just think that most of the reason that we consider the shuttle program a failure is that it was the wrong program. A low Earth infrastructure program was probably a stupid thing to follow on after a successful lunar program.
Although I would argue that a Mars mission or continued lunar program would have been stupid also.
Yeah, but I think they would have been less stupid.
Why do you think that?
Well, what if we found a giant cache of Pentium processors on the moon?
What if they were on Mars all along and we went to the moon like a bunch of morons?
Elon's laughing at us. You know, NASA today, though, my issue with NASA today is that you have about 18,000 employees, and I believe that's just the civil servant component. That's not the contractor component, too.
Oh, yeah. The contractor part is gigantic compared to the civil servants.
So if you add the contractors and the civil servants, and I don't know, let's call it like 60,000, who knows? That's probably pretty conservative. You have some large component of those who are engineers. And there are a lot of very talented engineers there. But they're like, oh, I love space. I love NASA. It's cool. You know? And so they kind of like diddle their whole career away at NASA, not really doing anything, because NASA doesn't really do much, you know? And so I feel like there's this giant pool of talent stuck at NASA that's holding on for like, let's do something really cool. And NASA's never going to get there because ultimately it's a political organization. And every 4 or 8 years, you'll have a new president come in who decides NASA should do something completely different. And so...
To the moon. No to Mars. No to the moon.
No to L5. It's all about L5.
Sure.
You know, and so ultimately you have all these people stuck there and they want to do cool stuff, but they're not really. They're just working at NASA. And I think that's a huge loss. We have tens of thousands of engineers doing nothing. And I would like to live in a society that benefits from the useful value created by them working in the commercial market. And I think that is a bigger detriment than, you know, $17 billion a year budget. In the grand scheme of like how much the government spends and like how broke the country is and everything. Like 17 billion, who cares? You know.
That's true.
So I don't think the money is the issue. I think it's the talent that's tied up.
Yeah, it is kind of sad. On the other hand, the same people who want to build cool stuff at NASA, if they go out in the private sector and start looking for work, I feel like a lot of what they end up building is stuff to murder other people.
There's value in murdering some other people.
It's true. That's a popular opinion.
What do you think about NASA as an organization, Blake?
It's, I mean, it's hard to separate the kid that you were from the adult that you are, and to say, landing on the moon, those huge fiery towers that could go to space and take people there and land on the moon, and say, all that stuff was really cool, but I wish it hadn't happened. It's really hard to say that, but it does just seem like this colossal waste, and the amount of bright-eyed enthusiasm that the world got from landing on the moon wasn't really worth the cost. And anything that NASA's done since, unmanned missions aside, hasn't been worth it. And it's been a waste of talent and a waste of money. And it also sort of has the side effect of sucking the oxygen out of commercial space development. I think SpaceX probably came a lot later than it would have if there just hadn't been a NASA. Maybe there was some tiny space research agency, the SRA, I guess, and all they did was launch unmanned probes and telescopes and things like that. And there would have been people going there to do cool stuff, and it would have been really specific cool stuff, and they probably would have done an equal or better job. But the whole manned part of NASA, it made it where it was much harder to do commercial spaceflight. So I guess I can't remember who are the players right now. It's like,
Is Blue Origin Jeff Bezos' company?
yeah, but I don't think they have sold anything yet.
And they're very quiet. They're not always like tweeting up things like Elon Musk is. So, like, I think they've done several launches, but I don't know if they've put anything in orbit. You have, is it Richard Branson's spaceship company in Mojave?
Virgin Galactic?
Yeah, but he's also got one called the Spaceship Company. Or something. They're somehow partnered.
For a while there was Armadillo Aerospace, but I think they gave up.
Yeah. Were they the one in New Mexico?
I'm not sure where they were. That was John Carmack's company.
Okay. Yeah.
But there's another company that offers commercial space flight and is selling it to the military right now. I can't remember their name.
Okay.
But I think there would have been a lot more commercial space development if not for NASA.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Maybe you remove the biggest buyer of space services. But I know that people were launching commercial satellites and military satellites left and right without using NASA. And I think they probably would have done it more if there weren't a bunch of engineers and scientists sucked into, let's orbit a couple people around the Earth for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, I like what you said about deflating people's memories of how cool Apollo was. I've had a lot of interactions with people in the last 6 years since I left NASA where they're like, oh, astronauts. And they're just so dreamy and starry-eyed about astronauts. And then you're like, oh yeah, I worked with astronauts. And they're like, oh god, that must have been awesome. And you're like, yeah, they're just kind of normal people. And they're like, no, they're the best of the best of the best. And you're like, well, no, I mean, some of them can't turn a camera image 90 degrees in their head to line things up, they can't do basic tasks. Some of them are very obviously just affirmative action hires. Some of them are have less education than I do, and they're on the Space Shuttle. And I was like, some of them, when I was a test director and they were my test subjects, some of them are really abysmal. And it's now some of them are really awesome, and some of them are, spectacular, very smart people and very talented. But there is a lot of junk in the astronaut corps that's there, some affirmative action, some with this insane obsession NASA has with teachers. And then and so it's kind of fun, and I've kind of developed it into a script and, certain lines I love to use when I run into these people, and they're like, oh, astronauts. And I kind of take joy in bursting that bubble for them.
You're a terrible person. Yeah, I definitely see that sort of I guess, hero worship thing going on at a lot of levels. I remember talking to, I believe it was William Carpentier, and he was the flight surgeon on some of the Gemini missions and some of the Apollo missions, especially Apollo 11. And I remember asking him, did you ever think that the mission was going to fail? Like they were going to crash on the moon, or the astronauts would get stuck there and die, or something like that? And he was like, no, not for a second. And I was so shocked. he, he never considered, what if all of this stuff that's literally never been done before, what if one critical component fails? Is there a chance of that? No, there's no chance. Nope. And it was sort of nice to hear that level of confidence from him. But as an engineer, I know that that's wrong. It's just wrong. There's not no chance of it failing. There's a high chance of it failing.
So do you know if he had an engineering background, or was he just a doctor?
I believe he just had a medical background.
Okay.
Also, he did tons of cool stuff when he was a kid, jumped out of helicopters and things like that. He has this amazing life story.
Yeah.
And I think the other person there was, his name was like Craig Ferguson or something. I'm not sure if I'm remembering his name right. But he was I think, chief pathologist. I don't know what that job is, like in case you get space plague. But he had the same opinion too. We were both at lunch together, and he was like, "Oh no, I wasn't gonna fail. But it's ridiculous." And avid fans of the space program will know that Richard Nixon had a speech drafted up in case the astronauts got stranded on the moon, because there was a very real chance of that happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a good thing it didn't, but there was a real chance.
If they had, we would have never known that there are no Pentium processors up there.
Just a bunch of black, terrible dust that gets into everything, and it ruins everything.
But if you bring it back, it's worth a lot of money.
That's true.
And some people will throw away highly lucrative careers in order to have sex on a bed of it.
Is that a real thing that happened?
Yeah. The people who broke in and stole the moon rocks back in 2001 or 2002, mm-hmm. There were those interns who broke into a lab and like stole a safe full of moon rocks, and then like it was a 4-person conspiracy, if I remember correctly, and 2 of them were dating, and so for funsies they like threw a bunch of this lunar dust on a motel bed and had sex on it.
Well, they'll always get to say they did that.
Yeah, I guess not many people can. I actually I had a class, like one of the girls who was caught up in that, she went to my college. She was like a year or 2 ahead of me, and she was in my circuits class like the next semester while she was awaiting sentencing.
Wow. So in summary, NASA is bad.
It's very demoralizing.
I remember someone said that once.
Do you actually remember the story?
Yeah, I remember.
Okay. I was going to tell the story, but...
You can tell the story.
Okay, so we were at lunch. Several friends and Blake and me, and we all worked at NASA. And we went to Buffalo Wild Wings for lunch one day. And I knew the waiter. And he was kind of an acquaintance. And I knew him. And so he was, just talking and stuff with us, chatting a little more than a waiter normally would. And then he was like, I think he knew I worked at NASA or something. And somehow it came up or whatever. And he was like, oh...
We had our NASA badges on.
Maybe we did. I don't know. And he said something like, oh, that's great. I bet it's really exciting working at NASA. Another one of these people who needs their bubble burst. And so Blake looks at him and goes, it's actually very demoralizing.
I think I quit a few months later.
Yeah. It wouldn't have been long after that. I think it was like, it was only like March or April when you and I ran into each other there. And then you quit in like July, something like that. It was not very long.
Sounds about right. Yeah. It really was demoralizing though. It made me... The problem was the project that I was working on was essentially paid for in advance. And it was software that the civil servants had to use to do their jobs, or else they'd get fired. And so people who work in user experience design will know that if your users have to use your software or else they'll get fired, that your incentive to produce an easy-to-use quality product is 0. And it was extremely frustrating as a bright-eyed young engineer just out of college to work in an environment like that where you weren't incentivized to do anything well, just to have your butt in a seat so that you could build a government for contractor hours. And everyone else who worked there either was gradually becoming demoralized in the same way, or they were the type of person who could just tolerate it indefinitely. And they're just like, well, job's a job. And neither of those people were the most fun people to be around all the time. And so I had to go somewhere else.
Okay, so I have a funny NASA story I'd like to tell.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, it's one of my favorites. So, Johnson Space Center is basically built like a college campus because I believe Baylor University owns the land, and NASA got a 99-year lease to use the land from Baylor University. And so the stipulation was that they would build it like a college campus in case Baylor ever takes it back over. And then it would be usable as a university. And so it's a lot of buildings, separate buildings, kind of like office buildings and stuff that could be converted into a college type thing where you have a whole bunch of buildings everywhere, which I don't know why they think that's efficient for a college instead of one like mega building, but it's just that way. Okay.
That's cool.
So, yeah. So every building has a facility manager, and the facility manager's job is to coordinate things like, hey, the HVAC system's going to be out this weekend, or, they're doing a power outage to, do something. And so basically they coordinate the people who are going to come do this facility work and with the people who normally work in the building so that they know what's going on in case there's any kind of, interference or something, clean out all the fridges before we cut the power all weekend, junk like that. And in a lot of cases, the facility manager for the building is someone who just normally has a regular job in that building too. Okay, so there'll be like an engineer who has a full-time engineering job, and then they are facility manager on top of this. And it's typically a pretty minor deal because, that kind of maintenance is not very common. And so some of the facility managers are contractors and some are civil servants, and it's not that big of a deal. But some buildings have a dedicated facility manager who has no other job. Okay, so it's for specific buildings that have a lot of like facility issues on an ongoing basis because of the nature of the building. So one of the buildings I worked in was, I believe, building 33, and it's this environmental test facility. And so there's all these big thermal vacuum test chambers that they test like EVA hardware and other things in. And there's a dedicated facility manager for that building because there's all of this like liquid nitrogen piping everywhere, and there's vacuum chambers, and there's all this like super high voltage, like 440 voltage turbo pumps, and all of this like intensive infrastructure stuff in the building. So it has a dedicated facility manager. The interesting thing though is that the engineers who run that test equipment and set up the tests on it actually do all of the facility management work because they're the ones who know about the chambers, and they're coordinating with the test directors and all this other stuff. So the facility manager for that building does nothing. So they have zero duties. So the building has a dedicated facility manager because it's so complex, but then the facility manager job is overtaken by the engineers who work in that building. So while I was there was this woman who had been facility manager in that building for a long time, because why would you ever give up that job? And so
yeah,
she would sit in this office in the front. You would only see her when she would come out to go to the bathroom, and then she'd go back to her office. And the people who had been working there for a long time told me that she had raised both her kids from birth to 5 years old in that office until they were old enough to go to public school. And so she would just bring them there and take care of them as a daycare. She was a civil servant. She had absolutely zero job responsibility. And so we looked her up on the websites one day where you can look at like, civil servant pay. And she was making like $109,000 a year to do that job.
It's a pretty good gig if you can get it.
Yeah, why would you ever give it up?
Maybe you get demoralized enough.
I don't know. You could do whatever you want. You could just take up Twitch streaming.
Yes. From the awesome NASA internet.
It had to have huge bandwidth for all the people dicking off all the time.
No, I remember when that one guy held his boss and secretary, his boss's secretary hostage,
Yeah.
and then shot himself.
Yeah.
Everybody at every desk was trying to watch a live streaming news feed of the helicopters that were flying overhead. They're like, "There's my car."
I recall that too, and I recall us also all trying to watch it at our desk, trying to stream it at the same time and it not working. And then we were like, wait, we have a control room down the hall that has televisions. And so we went in there and we just watched it on TV.
The internet was not up to the task.
It was a murder-suicide that happened at Johnson Space Center in 2006 or early 2007.
Oh, he did? He killed his manager?
He killed his manager, and then he took took his secretary hostage for a while, and then I believe he released her, and then he killed himself.
Oh, okay. And then some people ask me, "Where were you when that happened?" And I was like, "Oh, I was over here in this other building." Didn't matter. Yeah. It was very dramatic, though.
For like 2 hours.
He had lost his last gruntle.
Mm-hmm.
But luckily, NASA never had any other incidents like that. Oh, wait. Wasn't there that astronaut who drove to Florida?
Wearing diapers, with a BB gun, a can of mace, a fake mustache, and a wig in the car?
What, there was a fake mustache?
I believe so. I don't know. Who cares? Let's assume there was.
It's funny, though, because everyone really seized on the diapers thing, and I remember thinking, that's really smart. Lets you take a lot fewer bathroom breaks.
I guess once you let it go the first time in the diaper, then you just kind of get over it. I wonder if... Okay, so imagine
There's no way that was the first time.
Imagine you're in the car, okay? You're on I-10.
No, but...
Hold on.
No, you're an astronaut.
Okay. Yeah, I guess. Okay. You're saying they already have experience wearing diapers, so it's not really a learning... It's not really like, let's get over it. Okay.
Yeah, an astronaut would just say, "Hey, I know this one weird trick that lets me drive to Florida a lot faster to kidnap a rival lover."
And rival lovers hate her for it.
They hate it.
I do remember the inventory in the car was really wild. It was like a BB gun, there was a can of mace, there were some trash bags and maybe some zip ties. I forget. It was like this really half-baked plan to maybe kidnap, maybe murder, maybe dismember. I don't know. Let me just drive there first and see what happens. In her defense, okay, I'm gonna defend her for a little bit here. Okay, so
okay, good luck.
This was the incident back in again late 2006 or early 2007. A female astronaut drove to Florida, ended up getting arrested because she was apparently going to confront the other woman who was involved with her boyfriend. So
another astronaut.
Yes. So this guy was another astronaut, and basically they were hooked up, and then he started like seeing this other woman in Florida, and so the female astronaut got jealous and lost her mind and drove to Florida wearing diapers, apparently, though her lawyer contested that, and confronted her, ended up getting arrested, and then eventually she would not resign from the astronaut corps, I believe, and so they kind of kicked her out. The Navy sent her back to Air Station Corpus Christi, and basically left her there for a little while. I don't know what happened afterwards, because I don't think anybody cared anymore. In her defense, she was separated from her husband, and she had 2 kids who I believe were 14 and 16 at the time. So she's separated from her husband, and I believe she was separated because she had started this affair with this astronaut. Then she finds out that this astronaut is not really that interested in her. He's just kind of like bouncing between women, you know.
I believe he was also married.
I I'm not sure about that. I'm not going to say
Okay.
no, but I don't believe that's correct. In her defense, I mean, she had already basically lost her marriage over this astronaut. And then it turns out that, well, duh, he didn't really care about you. He's just like, you know, a military pilot astronaut guy who, you know, does these kind of things. So,
Best of the best of the best.
yeah, of course. Absolutely. So, so, you know, I can understand how she would have kind of a bad mental reaction to that. And then drive 18 hours cross country with a diaper and a BB gun.
It wasn't 18 hours though. That was the thing. It was Houston to Florida in something like 9 hours.
No way.
It was something where if you map it out, she went at an average speed of something, I think it was over 80 miles per hour the entire time. Average. And she had to get gas because no car can make that range
Yeah.
in that amount of time. And so it represents this level of dedication and force of will that very few people have when they find out that they're the other girl on the side.
It's the best of the best of the best.
And in some ways, yes. It's some people are crazy, but some people are crazy engineers or astronauts. And then you see this level of sophistication that you don't see anywhere else.
Lisa Novak.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was her name.
So what did we get wrong?
She denied wearing diapers. Early police reports indicated she wore space diapers, not just diapers, but space diapers.
Probably space diapers are really slim profile and a lot more comfortable.
She packed latex gloves, a black wig, a BB pistol and ammunition, pepper spray, a hooded tan trench coat, a 2-pound drilling hammer, black gloves, rubber tubing, plastic garbage bags, approximately $585 US in cash, her computer, an 8-inch Gerber folding knife, and several other items.
I guess there was gum.
Space gum.
Astronaut ice cream. I also like a BB pistol and ammunition. Oh, okay. That's pretty scary. Ammunition for it. Probably hundreds of rounds of BB ammunition
17 caliber destruction.
for her semi-automatic BB pistol. Fully semi-automatic.
If she'd had 2 of them, it would have been an arsenal.
And then she arrived at the compound known as Motel 6.
Are we going to do a podcast on media and journalistic incompetence?
A podcast. You mean like a whole separate podcast with its own separate set of episodes? It reminds me of this joke where people would say, "What is the value of a high school guidance counselor?" Because if you're a high school student, you're going to this person asking for career advice, but from a person who chose to become a high school guidance counselor. And so that's not to denigrate any high school guidance counselors out there. Maybe they're doing a great job. I don't know. But you could just see maybe there's a little bit of selection bias going on there.
Yeah.
I feel a little bit of that towards journalists, where you're seeing the entire world filtered through somebody who definitely did not get an engineering or science degree, or necessarily a degree in understanding any particular field in depth. And often, if you're a technical person, you're reading news articles about things that are way above the journalist's head every time. I'm constantly reading articles where a journalist is speculating about AI. That's a good one. Or anything else. Anything, really. Yeah, maybe we should talk about that sometime. Gather up your favorite examples. Do you have more to complain about the space shuttle? Or defend?
Oh.
You know, only 2 blew up. It's a pretty
2
good score.
out of 5.
2 out of... You know, if you just keep the program going forever, it'll be 5 out of 5.
Let's talk about space shuttle abort and escape modes.
Oh, yes. I actually had a note. Make sure to ask Craig
Yes.
about transatlantic abort.
Okay, so the space shuttle when it launched, it would have all these different abort modes depending on how high it was and how fast it was going.
Why would you need an abort mode?
Because something could go wrong, like an engine goes out, right? And so you can't produce enough thrust to get to orbit or something like that.
Okay.
Okay. So, the basic abort modes were first, don't launch. That's a pretty simple one they used a couple times.
Don't launch.
Sorry, we have to start there. Okay. And then they had return to launch site, I believe was the next one. And this was one that the astronauts actually thought was probably not survivable. They were not very hot on using return to launch site because essentially you would have whatever failure caused you to need to abort the mission, but you would keep flying for a little while. Then you would turn the shuttle around once you were out of the thickest part of the atmosphere. You would basically turn the shuttle around 180 degrees and just keep thrusting the other direction now, and you would fly back towards Kennedy Space Center and you would land at Cape Canaveral. Okay?
So, for reference, for our listeners, can you tell them what hardware would still be attached to the shuttle at this point?
The external fuel tank, you would dump the SRBs.
Okay.
So you would still have the fuel tank, and you would just run the shuttle's 3 main engines still. And so they really did not like the idea of that abort mode because you would be stressing the shuttle in ways that people probably analyzed it, but maybe not enough, or they really didn't have much faith in it. They were not excited about that abort mode. But when you were not high enough or not far enough away, then or fast enough, sorry, then that was your way to abort. Okay, and so then you would have I forget exactly what it's called, but it's basically transatlantic abort. So you're flying out mostly east, but
oh no, wait, I gotta stop you here. I think you left out another abort mode.
No. I left out an abort method. We'll get there. We'll get
All
there.
right. Okay.
So you would have transatlantic abort, which they had this landing site in Zaragoza in Spain. And it apparently, it was like a military base, but it actually had a runway long enough to accommodate the shuttle. And so for a certain altitude and velocity profile during the ascent, you could ditch the SRBs and ditch the fuel tank, and then you would just glide to Zaragoza and you would land. They never used that one either. Then they had abort once around, which basically meant they had enough velocity and altitude to go around the Earth once and land either at Edwards or Kennedy, depending on how much velocity and altitude. And then they had abort to orbit, which was they could reach a stable orbit, but it maybe wasn't as high as they had wanted for the mission. And I believe they did an abort. They did an abort to orbit one time, and I forget the details of that, but I do know that the same crew then launched that mission again, like 8 or 9 months later, and they carried out what that mission was for. But they did an abort to orbit once, but they never did transatlantic. I don't think they ever did once around. They certainly never did return to launch site. But then after the Challenger vehicle was lost, they said, hey, we need some better ways, we need some better contingency plans for what to do in an emergency on the shuttle. And so they sat around and they thought, and I guess they got really drunk or something, and they came up with all these really bad ideas. And so some of the things they kicked around initially were, let's build a capsule, a bunch of capsules within the shuttle, and each person will sit in one. And if the shuttle breaks up, then the capsule holding the people they just spread out, and then the capsules, I guess they still hit the water at terminal velocity or something, but, at least if the capsules don't break apart, you can recover them or something. I don't really know.
The corpses become very easy to identify.
Yeah. It eases the accident investigation. They had all these, like, really terrible ideas, and so the most terrible, which is one they implemented, was the escape pole. So, the escape pole...
What was the escape pole?
The escape pole is an actual pole that would be deployed out of the side of the shuttle. So, the shuttle had an airlock, and it had the payload bay doors. You could get out that way, but it also had a door on the side, like maybe a 3-foot diameter round door, Mm-hmm. And so the idea was you're in some kind of fantasy scenario in the shuttle where it's so bad that you have to get out of the shuttle right now. But it's so mild that you're not dead already. Which, in the shuttle program, like, it's really hard to imagine how that could happen. Like, you got to get out now, but, you're not dead. So they would literally have this pole that they would deploy out that side door, and they would all be wearing parachutes, and then, in whatever, slipstream velocity they're going through at the time, they'll shimmy down the pole, and they'll get to the end of it so that they're clear of the wings, and then they'll let go and they'll deploy their parachute. And, the reason you can't just jump out the door is you have the wing behind you that's probably going to hit you. And so they would just shimmy down this stupid pole, And it's like, who comes up with this where, the 2 times that the shuttle was lost and the crews were killed, like, there was not significant enough warning to do anything. Once the crew knew things were going south, it was too late, right?
Yeah.
There was no time to, okay, somebody get up, you open the door, you get out the pole, push the pole out the door, everybody line up, we'll start shimmying down the pole, And that's why the pole was a stupid idea. But it was another one of those things where it's like NASA will tell people that it's doing this so that people are like, man, they thought of everything. It's great, When in reality, I don't know. It would be interesting to talk to an astronaut and ask them what they really thought about the pole.
Isn't there still sort of the question of passing through the 3 SSME exhaust plume on your way out?
I think part of the assumption was that the pilots would cut the engines if you were in a regime of flight where the engines were running and try to achieve, like, a stable glide and try to slow down to a speed that you could safely jump from.
So is the shuttle horizontal at this point?
It's in some kind, like I said, it's in a fantasy condition where you can do all these things. That's why it was so dumb.
Because also, once the wind speed gets up to maybe 80 miles per hour, your ability to shimmy across the pole is going to drop to almost 0.
Right.
And the shuttle gets up to 80 miles per hour in, a few seconds? And then it spends the entire rest of its trip at over 80 miles per hour until the last few seconds.
Yeah, and with the swept wings like it has, the stall speed is going to be much higher than 80 miles an hour.
I thought it was something like 200 miles per hour.
It's going to be pretty fast because of the wing shape. But, that was the issue with...
Maybe the pilot puts the shuttle into a barrel roll style spin on purpose, so it's tumbling, and then you get on the pole and it just slides you right off. That would work at very high speeds even. I don't know. Maybe that's what they were trained to do.
We don't want to try to act like there's any more legitimacy to this idea than there really is, because there was basically none.
No, they thought of everything.
They're the best of the best of the best.
So I feel like you're still saving the best for last here.
Wait, what am I forgetting? That's
tell the listeners about the zip line.
Oh yeah. Oh lordy. Okay, so there's this zip line. So at the launch complex, formerly at the launch complex, because I think they've demoed all that stuff now, but the complex they would launch the shuttle from. If you had some kind of an emergency during the countdown, and you had to egress the shuttle. So again, this is another fantasy thing where it's like stuff's so bad you got to get out of the shuttle, but you're not dead already. Even though the kill zone of the blast radius from like a fully fueled shuttle is like a half a kilometer or something. It's just, and so
all seven of you have to get out too.
Yeah, so they had this zip line. And it went, the shuttle's really tall when it's all stacked up and everything. So the guys are, they're like, I don't know, 90 or 100 feet off the ground. I don't know. They're pretty high up. And so they're up there, but they need to get away. Okay. So what do we do? All right, everybody, there's an emergency. It's so bad you gotta leave, but you can take your time and use this method. So they all get up and they open the door and they get out of the shuttle. And they're on the launch pad on the tower, and they're way up in the air. And so they get to this they get in a basket, and it's a basket on a zip line. And I believe it held 2 people, and I guess there were multiple baskets, I forget exactly. And you climb in, and then you hit a release, and when you hit it, it goes and it zips you down to the ground, several hundred feet away. And you're not really out of danger then because you're still within that like half-kilometer blast radius, And so you wait for all 7 people to zip down on their baskets. And then you all get in, I kid you not, an armored personnel carrier that they had parked at the bottom there. And there would be a couple of the people in the crew would be trained to drive the APC. And they would all, shuffle in their orange jumpsuits into the APC, and then they would like slowly drive away at tracked vehicle speeds from this half-kilometer kill zone. So and then somehow somebody comes in and takes care of the real problem that you had to get out of the shuttle from immediately, this slowly. And you just kind of drive away in your APC. So from time to time, you could find, what was it? Is it PAO, Public Affairs, for NASA? You could find some video from them of them doing a training activity with the zip line. But the training activities were always just climb in the basket and hit the switch, but the basket would be chained up so it wouldn't actually go. And then they would also train the guys to drive the APC, and there would be silly video of the astronauts driving the APC around, But
in a spacesuit, right?
Yeah.
They'd be fully suited at the time.
Now, an interesting bit, I believe it was it Charlie Bolden was the only person who ever actually rode the zip line in the basket. I think, I seem to remember that it only happened one time, like, that they were like, hey, we need to actually test this with a human in it, And so he did it. He got in the basket and rode it down to the ground.
Why didn't they test it with a technician whose name we don't know?
I don't know. Why? I can't remember if it was Mike Coates or Charlie Bolden.
You'd think they would be able to spring for a driver for the APC.
But see, no one expects the APC to survive if the shuttle blows up, so that's just another person in the kill zone. Everyone else was gone.
It could be inside some concrete blockhouse.
Yeah, you could try that.
You could try it.
I had forgotten about the zip line.
That's the best abort mode that I've ever heard of for anything, I think.
Do we have anything else to say about NASA? What about next week? Tesla.
That's what we have scheduled, yeah.
Okay. So next week, I'm going to talk a lot about why Tesla is a failing company going bankrupt.
All right. Literally betting money on it, aren't you?
Yeah, I actually I quadrupled my bet. So I now have put options against 2,000 shares of Tesla at $50 strike price. So if they go bankrupt, I'll make $100,000.
So you're really rooting for them to fail.
Well, no, here's the thing. I'm generally I'm very apathetic about the company. I mean, I don't really care, I'm not interested in buying a Tesla, and I guess they're neat and stuff, but like, I don't really care about the company. I'm mostly apathetic about Elon Musk. I mean, he's never harmed me, so I really don't care. But I just think that the company is going bankrupt. I mean, if you look at
Mm,
the financial statements, if you look at their SEC filings, if you look at their cash flows and everything else, I'm confident enough that they're going bankrupt that I've spent like $2,200 purchasing put options, betting that they will. So, I mean,
well,
you don't have to have a emotion in this. I mean, there doesn't need
that's
to
true.
be any specific hate of Tesla or Elon Musk. It's simply, I've looked at the numbers and at the situation the company is in and at the challenges it faces, and I don't think the company can survive.
All right. Well, I guess that'll have to be a topic for next week, and we'll probably need another topic because I don't think we can just complain about Tesla for 2 hours. So if we're able to do this podcast weekly for years on our 100th anniversary or something, our 100th cast anniversary, we'll be like, so how'd this
This
puts do?
Well, you'll actually know by January 2019 because that's when they expire.
Yeah, there we go.
So 18 months away. So 75 podcasts.